cloning, and teaming. Okay, this is the last nugget where we're actually going to focus on VMware and workstation topics. And although we are still doing workstation-focused topics, a lot of these things you're going to see as we move into VMware ESX. Cloning is one of the items that you'll actually see inside of VMware ESX, but teaming you may not necessarily see. Teaming is a tool that is helpful inside of Workstation for creating teams of machines that may need to connect to each other in a particular way, or may need to boot up together in a certain way. It's sort of ESX light in some ways. Some of the way that machines move with each other is very similar. So what we're going to learn in this nugget is in a minor way going to translate into things that we're going to learn with ESX. Cloning, first of all, is the concept of replicating a machine. Now we did sort of a quasi-cloning procedure in the last nugget where we actually copied and pasted a file from one location to the other. That is a kind of cloning, but with cloning we actually get some very useful and neat new ways that we can do cloning, and not the least of which is the concept of linked clones, which allows us to clone machines but not actually consume so much disk space. We sacrifice a little bit of performance to reduce our disk space requirements, but if we don't have a lot of disk space on our workstation, that may be useful for us. Teaming is a very good idea to use when I want to create lots of virtual networks, and I want to connect these machines together through a virtual network, perhaps a particular thread through that virtual network, and I want them all essentially to boot at the same time and to connect to each other through that virtual network. We're going to show in this nugget how you can create clones, and then we're going to use the clones that we created to create a team. And that team will actually we'll do some manipulation to it so we can show where these might be useful. So let's go ahead and create some clones, and for the purposes of taking that information and making teams out of it, I'm going to go ahead and minimize this, and we're going to bring up our VM nugget here. This is the machine that we've been working with pretty much up to this point, and this machine is currently powered off. In order for us to do a cloning, it's often a good idea to have that machine powered off so that we can do the cloning. To clone, we can go up here under the VM tab and choose the clone item right here, and it brings up the clone virtual machine wizard. So this allows us to clone this machine or create a copy of this machine for our purposes. In a previous nugget, we talked about the concept of template mode, and how template mode was really just a read-only version of the virtual machine that you can't actually make manipulations to. One of the ways that you would use cloning is once you've got your settings pretty well set for a virtual machine, you can enable that template mode, as it says here under VM settings options advanced, and that prevents the person from actually manipulating that machine. Once they create a clone of that machine, they can manipulate the settings, but they can't actually manipulate the settings of the templatized machine. Now, there's nothing to say that they couldn't just take it out of template mode, but it's kind of an idiot check, an idiot-proof idea to prevent you from making a mistake from a machine that you've spent meticulous time on getting the settings just perfect. So we've gone ahead and started this clone virtual machine wizard, and we're going to click next here, and we're going to get the option of how we want to choose the source information for our clone. We can choose either the current state of the virtual machine or an existing powered off snapshot. If we are using a snapshot, that machine has to be powered off to use the snapshot. We can create, we don't have any snapshots at this point because I've gone ahead and removed the snapshots that we created in the previous nugget. So all we have is the current state of that virtual machine. So we're going to choose the current state of that virtual machine. The most important decision you need to make whenever creating clones is what kinds of clones that you want to create. Now, there are those two types of clones we talked about earlier. It's the linked clone and the full clone. And you can think of a full clone as essentially the same thing as the file copy, but also copying that VMX file along with the VMDK file. The linked clone is slightly different. A linked clone is, as it says here, a reference to the original virtual machine and requires less disk space to store. It has to have network access to the original virtual machine disk file in order for it to function. Think of a linked clone as a snapshot, but just the snapshot, not the actual original file itself. So when I create this linked clone, I can move it around on my network as long as it still has network access to that original virtual machine, so it can create what the original file was, so it can show what the difference is. I'm going to create a linked clone in this case so I can show how small the files are. We click next here. We're going to give the virtual machine a name. I'm going to call it VM Nugget 10 in this case. So there's VM Nugget 10. And I'm going to give it a new location here under the desktop, and in that CBTN ESX virtual machines location, I'm going to create a new folder called VM Nugget 10. And there's our linked clone. I click next, and then poof, the clone is created. Now, that should have been fairly impressive to you, because the process for copying the virtual machine or for snapshotting the virtual machine is a pretty substantially long process to complete. Cloning that virtual machine, however, actually went pretty fast. You'll see here now that we see in our interface that this is a clone of this original location. For our clone to work, it actually has to have access to this original location for it to continue to function. Let's go ahead and minimize this, and let's open up this file folder here, because we want to take a look at what we've actually done. This is the original virtual machine that we created here, VM Nugget. This is the real virtual machine, and our VMware, our VMDK file here is 2.4 gigabytes in size. Now, if I go here to VM Nugget 10, our VMDK file is 1 megabyte. Now this is the size that a snapshot would take if there has been no changes. It's a very small amount of disk space. When I go to boot this machine, this file will actually increase because things happen whenever we change. So I'm going to start the virtual machine. You'll see the virtual machine starting up here, and as it begins, the virtual disk file will begin to change a little bit. It'll begin to grow a little bit in size as it begins to change what it's doing by the operating system. You'll see here this 1 gigabyte file, this vmem file, is created because we're actually launching the machine, and that's the virtual machine file for it. But as we're booting the machine and it's beginning the process of beginning the boot process, it's going to need to write things to its disk file. And as it's writing things to its disk file, it's going to write it to the local disk file and compare the local disk file with what it sees on the network. Now, you're probably saying, now wait a minute, if I've got to go over the network to a remote location to get the starter file for these linked clones, then I bet you there's some sort of performance impact, and that's absolutely true. Anytime that we do any kind of linked clones, we're going to have a performance impact associated with doing that linked clones here. Let me go ahead and log on locally here. Also, anytime you do linked clones, you're going to have to do the same process with resitting and taking out of the domain and changing the name and putting it back in the domain and everything. So there's still a process involved with actually doing these linked clones, but you can do it and create them much faster and involving much less disk space. You'll see here that just for me to log on to the disk space, the VMDK file is increased from 1 meg to about 23 meg. Now that's still substantially smaller than the 2.4 gigabytes that the original file is. So be aware of that, and be aware that this is a good way for you to, if you need to spin up some really, really quick test environments, and you're maybe not so concerned about performance, but you just want to get them spun up so that you can have multiple machines that are all operating off of the same VMware workstation. What's interesting about this concept of cloning is how easy it is to create multiple clones. So I've gone ahead and powered this off, and I want to create a couple more clones here. So I'm going to go VM, and I'm going to go clone, and next, and a linked clone, and I'm going to do VM Nugget 11. Oops, excuse me. I want to make sure that I don't do clones of clones, which is what I was just about to do. Now let me stop there for just a second, because you saw me made a mistake here. One of the error messages that you're going to get when you click on an existing clone and attempt to clone the clone is this error message that says the virtual machine you are cloning is already a linked clone. Your new virtual machine will require access to all virtual machines it's linked to. Very important point. If I'm creating a clone of a clone, I'm going to progressively increase or decrease the effective performance of that machine, because I have to traverse back across all those clones. The same process happens anytime you're doing snapshots. If I have multiple linked snapshots in my environment, those linked snapshots are going to slowly slow down the process, because each of those snapshots is a separate disk file that it needs to manufacture itself through as it makes changes to the system. So it's generally a good idea not to create clones of clones. So I'm going to go back here and do what I should have done in the first place and move back to VM Nugget and create a clone of VM Nugget. Just like we did before, I can create that snapshot. You'll see that I created that snapshot as the clone operation, but that would be creating a clone of a clone again, which is something I don't want to do. So I'm going to create the current state of the machine as a linked clone. I'm going to name it VM Nugget 11. And I'm going to change my location here back to the desktop, back to virtual machines, and create a new folder called VM Nugget 11. The useful part about this is just how fast it works. I mean, poof, this is done. For me to create a third one, I can go back here, and we'll explain why we're going through all this process in a second, but for me to create a third one, I go back here and I choose clone a third time, and I go through all these steps again and make it VM Nugget 12, and then go back to my desktop and create the location again for VM Nugget 12. So you see here how easy it is, NUGGET 12. You see how easy it is to use the clone feature to actually create a number of similar machines on my network. If I boot all of these machines, they will begin the process of powering on onto my system. They're going to be using about a gig of RAM apiece. Each one of these is set for 1024 mega RAM. They each use about 8 gigs of hard disk space. Now, where these clones come in handy is whenever you're actually using clones to create what are called teams. And a team is essentially just a series of virtual machines that are brought together in a single location and powered on and powered off at the same time. They also have the ability to create team networks. And it's the team network component that is really the cool part about teams. Anytime you create a team, you also take a little bit of the performance away from a system because of the overhead involved with managing the team. So whenever you're doing teams, be aware of that. But let's think about why we would want to use teams, for example. Let's say that I've got a system thread of systems, and I want to replicate those systems inside of my environment. And so, out here on the internet, I've got the internet, and I want to replicate someone from the internet. Maybe I'm not really interested in this first firewall, but I've got a web server sitting inside the first firewall. And then I've got another firewall that's maybe, this is an ISA server right here. And this ISA server is functioning as a firewall between the inside firewall and the outside firewall. And in the back, maybe I've got a database that the web server connects to, and here's my data store for the database. And this ISA server connects into the database. So what I'm trying to do here is I want to set up 3 different machines that connect to each other and use that as a demonstration for actually creating a network environment that's exposed to the internet. One machine might be a web server, one machine might be an ISA server that's serving as a proxy, and one server is a database server. Well, I've already got 3 systems that I've created, Nugget 10, Nugget 11, and Nugget 12 right here. So by creating these 3 systems, I can now create them as a team, boot them up all at once, and test the functionality of a particular function. Let's go ahead and talk about how we would do this. So let me go ahead and minimize this, and I'm going to go back in here to my VMware workstation again, and I have these 3 systems, VM Nugget 10, 11, and 12. So 10 is going to be my web server, 11 my ISA server, and 12 is going to be my my database server in the back end. For me to create a new team, I go to File, New, and Team. And so I have the option now of creating a new team. I create the team, first of all, by giving that team a name, and I'll just call it Team Nugget. Go Team Nugget. Browse, go to Desktop, and we need to give it a location for it to be stored at. We'll go Team Nugget. There we go. There's our location for Team Nugget now. And it's going to actually create some files in that Team Nugget location because it has to create pointers to the individual virtual machines. I can add virtual machines to the team now if I want. I do that by saying yes. I go Add Existing Virtual Machine because I've already created the virtual machine, or I could create a new virtual machine if I wanted to. If I wanted to, additionally, let's say I have all of these systems already ready and I want to create a team, just very quickly create a new clone of all the systems in my thread, I can do that by creating a new clone of virtual machine. So again, I can very quickly set up these environments. I'm going to say existing virtual machine. I'm going to choose 10, and there's the 10. I'm going to choose 11, and I'm going to go back one. Let's see. I'm going to go back one. Oops, back one, and there's 11. And then when I go existing virtual machine, I'm going to go back one, and there's 12. Okay, so those are the 3 machines that are making up our environment. Again, web server, ISA server, database server. Now I can add LAN segments to my team, and this is the cool part about adding those LAN segments. Again, if I'm creating these teams, back to my little diagram here, I may have a LAN segment for this part of the network, and I may have a LAN segment for this part of the network. My ISA server is functioning as a firewall, so it actually would bridge both of these 2 segments. So in order to do this properly, I would actually need to create a one LAN segment here and a second LAN segment here. Our web server, or number 10, would have one interface card, and actually, arguably, we might even create a third LAN segment if we wanted to out here for the internet. So my web server could have one inbound and one outbound card. My ISA server could have one inbound and one outbound card, and my database would have one inbound and outbound card because it's sitting on the inside. So let's go ahead and create these 3 LAN segments now. The first LAN segment being for the web server, the second for this internal network, the protected network, and the third here for our internet. We go ahead and minimize this. I'm going to go ahead and create the LAN segments now. 1, 2, and 3. That's about as all that you can do in this screen is create them and number them as LAN segment 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to click next, and you'll see here now that for each of the adapters in these virtual machines, I have the option of choosing which LAN segment that adapter is on. You'll notice, first of all, that I don't have enough Ethernet adapters in there to be able to bridge networks for either the web server or the ISA server. So at this point, I'm just going to leave all these as bridged and create the team. The first thing you'll see here is that Team Nugget actually has these 3 virtual machines now in it, and the virtual machines disappear. Again, because we're creating teams, the teams actually supersede the individual virtual machines, and we operate them as a single group. So you don't really have to think of them as individual virtual machines anymore. The first thing we need to do for this team, however, is add in some additional network cards for 2 of our servers so that we can bridge those networks like we want to. In order to create those additional adapters, I can do that from here inside of the team settings. There's actually 2 places you can do it, inside of the team settings, or I can actually edit the settings of the individual virtual machine. But it's kind of niftier to do it inside of here than inside of team settings. So I'm going to click the team settings tab, and I'm going to bring open the dialog box for team settings. And what I want to do first of all is for my 2 machines that are connected closer to the internet, that are most towards the internet, that are not the database server, I want to add in a second Ethernet adapter. So I click on that machine and I click add adapter, and I click on the second machine and add adapter. I can pretty much add adapters to my heart's content if I want for those machines as I need to. In this case, I only need 2 interfaces for 10 and 11. I have 3 LAN segments that I've created. And so VM Nugget 10 is going to be on LAN segment 1. Let me go ahead and bring up this again. VM Nugget 10 is going to be on LAN segment 1. Its second adapter on LAN segment 1. The ISA server, number 11, will have its first adapter on segment 1. So I want to put VM Nugget 10, second adapter on segment 1, and first adapter on segment 1. For VM Nugget 10, the third connection that I've created, the LAN segment, is this internet connection. For this third internet connection, I want to make sure that my first adapter is in the third connection. For the back to the ISA server, that now needs to bridge between between segment number 1 and segment number 2 so that it can connect to the database. Let me go ahead and minimize this. And so segment number 1, segment number 2, and then my database's only network connection is going to be on segment number 2. Now this is overtly complicated, but at least it gives you an idea of how you can create these LAN segments for the purposes of doing, again, system threading or separation or segregation of systems. You can think of these LAN segments almost as like VLANs. And as long as the machines on those individual LAN segments can connect to each other, they can route to each other, and they can resolve each other, they'll function in and of these LAN segments for each other. If I skip over the Virtual Machines tab for just a second and click on the LAN Segments tab, you'll see that for each LAN segment, there are a number of additional characteristics that we can configure for that particular LAN segment. Let's see here for LAN Segment 1, I can change the name of it. Maybe I don't want to call it LAN Segment 1. Maybe I want to call it External Internet Connection. I can also change the bandwidth characteristics and also the packet loss characteristics of that LAN segment. So what I can do with my environment is simulate if I have people coming in from the outside world that perhaps they don't have unlimited bandwidth. Maybe they're coming in over a leased line at 192 kilobits, and maybe that leased line has a little bit of packet loss to it, and it's it's got 0.5% of packet loss to it, and I want to see how my network service will respond when I have a lower bandwidth and also some packet loss associated with that LAN segment. Again, back to our example here. In our example, we may have some packet loss from the web server out to our client on the internet, and so here in this third LAN segment, I can actually simulate that lower bandwidth and see how my application will perform inside of that lower bandwidth situation. Obviously, anytime that I boot virtual machines, it's going to use a much larger than normal percentage of the total resources on my system. Booting a virtual machine is the hardest thing that you can do to a VMware server. And so in order to prevent all of these systems, because they're all coming up at once, from consuming all the resources all at once, I may want to add in some delay that prevents all of them from booting exactly the same time. You'll see here that we currently have the default delay set for 10 seconds. That's to say that after the first one boots, in 10 seconds, the second one will boot, and then 10 seconds later, the third one will boot. If I reduce this down to, say, 3 seconds between them, that can actually reduce the amount of time it takes for my full system to actually begin to get started here. The other thing I can do is actually change the order in which the machines get booted. Perhaps the ISA server needs to get booted before the web server gets booted. I have a few options as well, and I can change the team name here in the team configuration file. You'll see here that there is a vmtn file that is created for that team configuration file, and that's the configuration that shows what are the people in the team and how is that team configured. Now that I have this configured, you'll see that my team now is set up with the LAN configuration as we've set up here, and also our guest operating systems, and they're also now sorted by order of boot. If I start the team, you'll see something different appear, and that's this box that appears up here on the top. This box appears to allow me to see for each machine what that machine currently looks like, or a little snapshot, a little picture of what that machine currently looks like. Looks like there's not enough physical memory to power on the third virtual machine. So in order for me to boot all three of these virtual machines, I need to be able to not only be able to see what's going on, but also have enough virtual memory as well. I can shift back and forth between the existing virtual machines by clicking on the virtual machines up here. So if I want to switch on, let's say, VM Nugget 10, for example, which is my web server, and I can do some manipulation here while it's booting up, and then once I'm done there, I can switch over to VM Nugget 11 to do some manipulation here as it's booting up as well. I can move back and forth very easily between these machines because they're in and of a team. So what did we talk about in this nugget? We talked about clones, we talked about teams. This particular nugget was a little bit shorter than our previous nuggets because the concept of cloning and teaming, once you understand really how the portability of virtual machines works, it becomes quite easy to understand the concepts behind cloning and teaming. We talked about what are clones and teams and why you'd want to use them, and we also talked about creating and using both clones and teams. We're now going to take the information that we've learned about Workstation and we're going to move into VMware Virtual Infrastructure and VMware ESX to further our understanding of not only virtualization, but the data center products that VMware provides. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.